Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hashrate Happy Hour Podcast. This show is brought to you by Giga Energy, a leading electrical manufacturer focused on Bitcoin mining. This Monday's release is a round 2 of my discussion with Tony Clark, the president and founder of Great Oaks, where we are picking up the conversation where we left off by going deeper on how a utility company is looking for new business, or not, and a full walkthrough of building out an imaginary 5 megawatt site in an attempt to help explain some of the jargon that you can expect to hear in both industries. And so with that, I hope that you guys are enjoying these back-to-back bonus episodes with Tony Clark. This show is brought to you by Foreman, the leading miner management software where you can also manage and automate your curtailment strategy all from one clean dashboard. Whether you have 3 miners or 30,000 miners, and a robust, complicated curtailment strategy in a regulated power market, you can manage all of that leveraging Foreman. Guys, I honestly don't think I'm doing this software justice just by talking about it. You really need to go give this a try for yourselves just to understand how easy it is to start and quickly find multiple miners all at once, configure them all at once, and then set up your automated prompts for ramp up and ramp down for the particular curtailment strategy that you have. Seriously, if I can do this, which I have, and I still use to this day, then all of you certainly can do this too. Go check them out and get started managing your miners like a pro today at foreman.mn. That's FOREMAN.MN, foreman.mn. Today's podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, the Texas Blockchain Council, a Bitcoin-first, nonprofit industry organization working to make Texas the jurisdiction of choice for Bitcoin mining and blockchain innovation. They will be hosting North America's premier policy conference for Bitcoin and the digital asset ecosystem on November 15th through 17th in Fort Worth, Texas. For more information, please visit their website at texasblockchaincouncil.org. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Like I said in the introduction, we are back for round 2 with Tony Clark, the president and founder of Great Oaks. Tony, welcome back.
Thank you again for having me. Good to have round 2.
Yeah, we needed round 2, so I said it in the intro, but we had so much that we left off the table after our first discussion that we needed to come back and kind of dive into a couple other subjects. So I'm glad we were able to circle up so quickly and get this one turned around. So Tony, I think we already gave the audience your background and, what you're doing and how you're doing it. So maybe for this one, let's just jump right into kind of where we left things off. We were doing a little bit of talk around, working with the power company and what is their attitude towards you, your team, the companies that you're helping when the power company finds out that you guys are doing Bitcoin mining? Do they treat you different? Is there any difference there?
I think they do treat me differently, to be totally honest. I think being involved early on I think we said it on the last episode, but being involved early on and speaking their language goes a long way. It goes one of two ways. They either welcome you with open arms, which means they have experience with mining facilities and how that diversity looks like, or they're extremely hesitant to give an inch. Because they haven't seen it before, they don't understand it. So it really can go one of two ways. But being able to speak to them early on and provide the numbers and low profile that they're looking for goes a long way. Being able to, understand what they're looking for and what their best interests are.
Yeah, that's interesting that they do end up treating you different, and I'm not surprised, I guess, but interesting nonetheless. So you're kind of flirting with it, and I want you to go a little deeper. So it's speaking with them early, talking, numbers that they understand. You threw in there, like load profile of a Bitcoin mining company. Maybe just go a little deeper on some of those things, like how are you speaking to them, and what numbers are they interested in? What's the load profile? What the hell is that?
Sure, yeah. So you think about like your house, for instance, it goes through different periods throughout the day of high usage and low usage. That is a quantitative thing that they've measured and they know. So when you're building a house, they know, well, even though you put a 100 or 200 amp panel in there, you're never going to draw more than 40 amps ever in the life of a house. Same thing with a crypto mining facility, same thing with an industrial building or commercial. They have predetermined, pre-calculated buckets that they put you in. So when you say crypto, if they have that bucket available, those are the people that welcome you with open arms. If they don't have that bucket qualified yet, that's when you get kind of like the deer in the headlight roadblock. So the load profile is what the actual usage is going to be. So obviously your listeners are aware when you say you're going to be running a crypto facility, unless you're in maybe a regulated market where you're forced to shut off. If you're in an unregulated and the economics make sense, you're running all the time at the maximum that you can run. So
Yep.
whether that's a 1 megawatt, 20 megawatt, once you turn these things on and they're hashing, you're outside of maintenance, you're not turning these things off. So it's educating the utility on that aspect. So there is no up and down. It's basically a flat line plateau, up and then stay up. The other thing they really like to hear about is your two things would be like the diversity, which being a flat line load, there really isn't a diversity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's educating on that. And the other thing is power factor, which has been very interesting because early on, back in 1920, everybody was talking about how big of a deal power factor was. Well, come to find out, the way the power supplies, the PSUs are on these units, they're really cleaning up the power very well. So you're at almost a 0.99, 1.0 unity power factor on these sites. So a lot of education goes behind telling the utility about that because perfect power is a 1 on a power factor, and then everything you go down from that 0.9, 0.8, 0.7 is we call dirtier power. And for all that lowering, the utility is they're losing through resistance, they're losing power on the overhead lines. So that's something they really, really drilled down on. So I think those three things, I guess, would be like what the early on education is if they have no experience with it.
So that kind of that last part, Tony, maybe just to make sure I'm following you there, is you actually need to kind of educate the power company that the computers that are going to get plugged in, the Bitcoin miners, the ASICs, those are super efficient machines, meaning they're going to take all that power and there's not going to be any loss kind of from the distribution through the switchgear, the transformer, things like that, right?
Right. Yep. So on the ASIC itself, the power supply is converting from AC, which is a sine wave, to DC. And traditionally in our line of work, that creates, quote, dirty power. So unless you have filters on the power supply to clean it up. So it's educating them that, look, these filters exist. These aren't ruining your sine wave. They're producing clean power. Now, internal to the ASICs, there is a loss, right? They're probably only 80% efficient, and that's where that degradation happens, but it's not at the utility level.
Oh, that's all new to me. I actually didn't even know that. That's fascinating. You also work kind of all over the place, all over the U.S. on all these different projects. We said it in episode 1 or round 1. You've touched 700 megawatts of build out. Are there differences in the conversation between a regulated market or a regulated utility versus an unregulated utility? Let's just use an example of like somewhere on the East Coast versus ERCOT.
That's a great question, and that's a whole sub segment of profession,
Yeah.
the power brokers. But I can scratch the surface a little bit. Huge difference between regulated and unregulated. Regulated means it's regulated by the state which the utility's in. Unregulated meaning there are rules set up, but then the state says just operate within these parameters and you can pretty much do whatever. So in an unregulated, you can go shop your price. You can beat people up to get the best kWh number that you can, or the best power number. In a regulated market, there are some things you can do, but not a lot. And I've worked on a job in South Carolina, which is a regulated market. And, this facility, just because of the peak demand time between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m., they actually shut down the mining site because it was more profitable. The economics were more profitable for them to shut down than to continue mining. Same thing with Georgia. But then the regulated, you can shop that fixed kilowatt hour to the lowest bidder. So it's really and it's actually way more complicated than that. So I summarized it.
No, it's I had an episode with Blake King from Galaxy. We went pretty deep on ERCOT, and it's I feel like I'm starting to kind of get a handle on how that whole, it's like a whole world works, but it's definitely complicated. From like the power companies' willingness to work with you, do you see a difference there? Like, are they like and I guess it's kind of coming from like the stereotype of like, stereotypically everyone says ERCOT is like standing there with their arms wide open, like ready to receive all Bitcoin mining activity. Do you see any of that? Is that the case?
I think there's actually, from my limited experience, there's more openness to regulated markets. And it's because I don't think there's a ton of Bitcoin development happening in regulated markets because of these parameters that are prohibitive. Yeah. So it's the unregulated companies, markets. They're easy to work with, but I think I've seen more of a push or a pull from the utility client reps on the regulated markets.
And that doesn't entirely surprise me. I think the regulated utilities are still trying to figure out. Like, I think they're sitting on the sidelines having a little bit of FOMO over like what's going on in Georgia and Texas. Yeah. And, they're watching like going, damn, how do we get some of that on our grid system? But they can't quite fit it into their predetermined rate structures and tariffs and all this other stuff. So
that one facility I mentioned in South Carolina, they did not have, like you said, that predetermined bucket. And I argued with them. I said, guys, this is unlike any low profile that you have in your system. Why doesn't this exist? You can't expect this person to shut down for 6 hours a day. That's prohibitive. It's terrible.
Yeah. It's that's probably a time of day rate or something like that, where it's they make the peak window so expensive that you end up wanting to sit on the shoulders of the rate curve. I would imagine. Yeah. It's they're working on it. It's a long slog if you want to get new rates passed. And there's people out there that are willing to put in that time, but it could take 12 months just to get a new rate in place. And then start, like what we talked about, the timelines to build and get everything in place. You could be 2 years if you want to go and establish a new rate.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned on the last show, traditionally the utilities are great and the capacity's there, but it's a slow moving process.
Yeah, absolutely. So this kind of leads a little bit into one of the other things that I wanted to talk with you on round one about, which was, what does the future state of finding new sites look like? Because we're sitting here talking about how it could be a really long process, but you can find certain groups, certain utility companies that are excited about it, but what do you think the future state for finding new sites for Bitcoin mining looks like? Is that going to turn into the power companies having business development reps, things like that, or what do you think?
Yeah, great question. And those discussions are just starting to happen. I think, like with the Texas Blockchain Council, the Ohio Blockchain Council, I think those discussions are starting to happen at the state level. But I mean, this is what I envision for the future is, and I've been advocating this for a couple years now, not just for Bitcoin mining, but for heavy industrial users. Um, if I'm an investor and I have 200, I want to build a 100 megawatt site, and I've got cash in hand, why do I have to go look around for power and pay a fee to just for the utility to tell me nope, it won't work there, or yep, it'll work here? Turn that table around a little bit. And if maybe there's a fee there, or there needs to be a couple new positions on the utility, but I should be able to, as someone who wants to develop this and be such a big draw of power, I should be able to call the utility, speak to someone, maybe it's in business development or on planning protection, and they should say, you know what, over the past 6 months, we've identified a dozen circuits on our system that would benefit from a crypto facility, from a balancing standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint. Here are the 3 locations that I think would be great for you to go. Turning that discussion from ask no to hey, what could we do, and go from there. It doesn't exist, and
Yeah.
maybe Andrew and I with the state, we're talking about with the VPs of our local utilities about having those discussions, and again, they move slow, but they see it as a benefit too. Maybe that person is part of the business development team who has a direct tie to planning protection, who knows, where are all the loads at in the city. I don't know. And that goes for, like I said, all markets. I mean, as a data center, if I'm a Google or an Amazon, are those discussions happening, or is it just an ask and we'll build an infrastructure to you wherever you want?
I would be so fascinated to know if that was the same type of discussion for Google, Facebook, or Meta. It's kind of like Twitter. I don't know. Are we calling Facebook Meta? And is Twitter X? Like, are we?
Get with the times, Ben.
Right. Yeah, I'm behind on it all. Yeah, I wonder if those guys are having that same type of discussion. I just don't know. I talked to it's Ottertail Power Company. They're up here in the Midwest. They're a small generation and transmission power company, utility company, and I've had a lot of discussion with them, and they're in exactly the spot you just described. They know they've got load. They know that they service small towns. So they have a lot of excess capacity laying around, but they don't know where those pockets actually are. And the development reps, they keep telling me they don't have the bandwidth, which I never was all that sure what that means.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's physical headcount. I don't think they have enough warm bodies and seats to do the I don't know if it's the math or the analysis, but
there's an engineer in a cubicle somewhere that knows this answer.
I would imagine so. Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah, you bring a good point. I work with another client who strictly goes after municipal power for that reason. So he's the AMP, American Municipal Power Association. A lot of small regional municipalities join this to get, group benefits. But he's only going after those because he thinks, they have more power because they build out one sub to feed a whole city, and there's plenty of capacity on that sub. And B, they're more willing to talk. They don't have to follow the big the rules for the big conglomerates, so it's a little bit easier. So it's interesting you say that.
And now a quick word from our sponsor. This show is powered by Giga Energy. Giga Energy is a vertically integrated Bitcoin mining company that manufactures all of the electrical infrastructure needed to start mining Bitcoin. Whether that's medium voltage switchgear, PDUs, or power cables for your miners, the team at Giga Energy has you covered. Reach out to their sales team today for all of your electrical infrastructure needs at sales@gigaenergy.com. Use the word hashrate for the subject of the email, and you'll get 5% off your order. All right, now back to the show.
Yep. There's a municipal. I'm actually going Glencoe Light and Power. They've got it's the company that they have on their site. It's called Bit49. I'm going to be down there again at the end of this month. Just have struck up a pretty good relationship with both that company and the municipal power company. But yeah, same thing. Had excess power on the sub, and they're able to be super nimble and flexible with how they operate. And they were able to show a gigantic net benefit, not only to the rate, but then also like the tax base and like just basically everything else for the town. So it was pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another thing that we kind of wanted to get into on that first round was maybe covering a little bit of the basic jargon. We talked about this right before we hit record too, Tony. I have kind of a spectrum of audience that, starting on the far end, they're just kind of learning about Bitcoin mining. They're just kind of dipping their toe into the water. And then I have on the very far end of that, people who work at the power companies and actually know what we're talking about. So there's a lot of jargon, and the process is a little bit foreign. And it took me 2-3 years to actually get my hands around some of this stuff. So I'd love to do, I don't know, like a jargon 101, and maybe kind of have that take the shape of like, I'll pretend that I've got access to a site and just ask you some questions. What do you think about that?
Sounds great. Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's do it. So let's go with, I'm coming to you. I identified a little piece of land that has access to 5 megawatts of power. I have no experience whatsoever dealing with this type of power, meaning anything more than like residential power. And I know I want to put a Bitcoin mining facility there, and I come to you and say, "Hey, Tony, I found 5 megawatts of power, and I want to put a mining facility there. Can you help? What do we do? What do we got to do?"
Sure. Yeah. First thing would be discussing the site with the utility. They're obviously the provider of power, so they need to know first and foremost and do the sign off. Typically, like we just discussed, they're going to want to have you or us fill out a load profile sheet or a new service sheet. And on this sheet will be everything we just talked about, like loading, diversity, power factor. They'd like to see a rough one line, a rough site layout, just so that their engineers can start wrapping their minds around what's going on and how they're going to bring power onto your property. That would be first and foremost.
Yeah. Okay. So that even just that first step brings up quite a few questions for me. It's like, okay, they're going to want SLDs, single line diagrams, or line diagrams, like you just said. So they're probably going to want, we're probably going to have that for the transformers. That's plural. Let's just say we're doing containers for speed and for budgetary reasons. They're going to want that for the containers. Like what all do we have to kind of have had figured out just to provide that first step?
Great question. Before we speak with the utility, you and I would have to huddle up. So you've identified it. You call me. You say, hey, I've got this opportunity. We go, okay. We set up a meeting. And then I listen to you and we sit down and we design the site. So very high level. Here's the containers I'm considering. How do we lay this out? What's our spacing between hot aisle, cold aisle, and where are the transformers going, all that. And then, so once we have our ducks in a row, then I can assemble a single line diagram with that hand sketch, and that's what gets submitted. They
Okay.
don't need full on drawings that cost, money. They just need, hey, here's our thoughts.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. We're in this example, we're probably going to use Giga boxes. I'm a little biased, but
Sure, yeah.
Shameless plug. Okay, cold aisle, hot aisle. That comes to mind is like, how far apart would you suggest somebody keep the spacing between the cold aisle and the hot aisle so that you're not either intaking, the hot exhaust, or how would you lay that out? Which ultimately I'm asking that because I want to know how big of a parcel of land do I need for like 5 megawatts, 5 containers, 5 megawatts. We're going to need 2 transformers.
Yeah, sure. There's rules of thumb for that. So if you want an extremely dense parcel, we can get up to 35 megawatts an acre. I mean, and this would be stacking. I mean, we're stacking containers. These are air containers. And typically we have between, 40-foot spacing on the hot aisle and maybe 20 to 30 feet on the cold. The spacing, just for your listeners, the spacing is important because on the cold aisle where you're sucking air in, you want to make sure that there's no resistance to that intake of air. So that spacing gives the cold air room to be easily passed through. And then on the hot aisle, we let, whether you're forced into the hot aisle or just with the miners with their natural fans, we want space so that air can come horizontal and then cool off. And as it cools, it rises and creates kind of a stack effect. So that 40 feet gives plenty of space for that transition to happen. Again, this is location dependent. This is latitude dependent. I mean, there are some things, humidity takes a factor into this.
Mm-hmm.
40 feet's a rough idea.
Got it. I appreciate that. Holy shit. That is a super dense acre of land. Wow. I heard you right. 35 megs per acre.
Correct. I did a 125 megawatt design with 35 megawatt per acre. And again, that's double stacked air, overhead aerial distribution conductors, right straight into pat mounts. I mean, it's an efficient design.
Wow. Oh. Okay. All right, cool.
Like, rule of thumb, that's the high side. You can go down from there. I mean, 20 to 25 is a reasonable single stack.
Yeah. Maybe on the layout, I'd be curious to get your thoughts if you've seen this. Have you seen how Soluna lays out their containers? Oh, I wish. Okay. Well, no. I'll have to circle up with you maybe after. They have a super interesting design, and I got a chance to listen to their chief tech officer speak to it. It's almost like a zipper pattern, so I guess the way to describe it to help the audience kind of visualize this, they make an X shape. And so you've got kind of X, like an X pattern where the corners touch. Anyways, it's all I'm sure everyone has, the best layout, but I'll have to show you that after we get done.
Yeah, I'd be really curious. Well, and some, to your point too, like Giga, they have a different way they do the hoods with the air filtration. Mm-hmm. So it's really dependent on, and I think that's a great discussion that, hypothetically you and I would have early on. Like, I'm assuming you have containers that you're interested in. So let's look at those and then lay out the site accordingly.
Okay, cool. All right. So we've kind of identified equipment, everything that's going to go into this 5 megs. We're going to, have a nice tidy little parcel of land because we don't need a ton of space. I would imagine then we start to get into like what voltages the power company is going to be providing. I guess how, and we touched on this in round 1, where you see kind of an array of different voltages. And I think 12,470 is the most common, right? Is that something that the power company just makes up? Is that something that they are transmitting all through their grid system? Maybe touch on like, why do they give you the voltage that they give you?
Sure, yeah. In a power company, you have multiple layers of distribution. One of the most common is that there's a range, 12,470 to 13,8. That's a very common sub-distribution level voltage. So I think between that being common on the utility and being common, on what's available in the material market, that's why that is so standardized. They probably go hand in hand. Probably if you looked at all the sites ever in America and you graphed them along the primary voltage, your 12,470 to 13,8 would be the top of the parabola, and then going lower would kind of diminish, and then going higher would kind of diminish. So that's where that nominal voltage comes.
Okay. Now, let's just say I'm a little bit privy to some of this, and I say, well, Tony, I can get a better power rate from this power company if I go with like a primary voltage. Why don't we just do that? What would you say in response to that to a client that says like, well, power company will give me a better rate if I take the bigger voltage?
What voltage are you talking about?
Well, and so maybe I'm misspeaking, but I think they have like a transmission voltage, right? Isn't there like 3 tiers of voltages that you can pick from? And
are you saying voltages above the 13.2?
Yeah. Like, isn't there a transmission voltage that you can tap into?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, we'll call it 13.2. The next common is 34.5, then 69, and then 138, and then 345 is the top typical. So if the question is both voltages, so we've got, the utility company comes back and says, look, we've got 13.2 in the area and we've got 69 in the area. Which one would you want? I would absolutely say 69. And for a couple reasons, like you mentioned, your rate is substantially better on the 69 side. The negatives are, you're going to have to build your own substation, which there's a cost to that. But then the flip side is, if you have access to have a bigger site, if they say 69 is available for X number of megawatts, I would encourage all of your listeners to say yes, please, because that usually indicates a bigger site is possible. If you're fixed in the site, so if they say that for like a 2 megawatt site, I'd say no, because the economics don't make sense.
Got it. And that's because, just to round that out completely, like you said, we'd have to build a substation for 5 megawatts just to tap into that. And that would balloon the budget to just the most unreasonable point, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So another variable that has to be weighed,
Yeah. Yeah. So then I imagine we're kind of working through all this now. Permitting is something that we've got to deal with. I'm going to be completely honest, and this is like me being truthful right now. Like, permitting, for whatever reason, is so intimidating to me. So permitting, we got to get into permitting. What does that process look like?
Yeah, it's kind of typically it's a 2-part. It's a local and it's a utility permitting process. So once you've gotten over, okay, we've got, in this hypothetical site, we've got 5 You said 5, right?
Yep.
5
5
megawatts.
megawatts. Yep.
We've talked to the utility. They've green lighted it. We've sat down. We've kind of sketched it out. We're good. The next thing they're going to say is, okay, we've given you our verbal approval or even just an email approval for this amount. The next is we would like to see your drawings. So this is where we would convert those hand sketches or those 1 or 2 sheets that we've had before into a permitted drawing set. And this is definitely something I'm passionate about because, again, going back to our previous discussion, there are 10 ways to skin this cat, expensive ways and code compliant, low cost efficient ways. So this is where that pen would go to paper and the design would happen. This design is actually looked at by 2 entities. So I said local and utility. The utility wants to look at it just to confirm it goes with what they were initially thinking because some time has passed. And then the local building department would want to look at it to make sure it complies with code. And that is a very interesting process depending on the site. If you've got a 5 megawatt site, submitting drawings, working with the local building department, a lot of times that is another education because just that just bumps down another level and they have no idea. So it's educating them on that. But a lot of times on these sites, you have high voltage and, high voltage doesn't cross a building department's desk very often. So they sub that out. I do plan review for municipalities on the high voltage side who just don't have the manpower. And this is, I do this all the time.
Yeah.
So they'll send me the drawings and say, look, as the PE, review these. So they're sending that out. So there's that. There's also that that barrier. All these things. It can be intimidating on the outset, like you said. But if you A, speak the language, B, have the credentials, and C, have done this before and can educate them, it goes back to being a partnership.
Got it. Okay. Whew. Yeah. I mean, it like makes my chest tight just thinking about all the stuff. It's not for me. Like that part, man, I'm so happy that there's folks like you that can take care of that. Anyone who's dealt with like the permitting side that is not in your position, I don't know if you guys feel that way or not, but it's forever given me heartburn. Now let me maybe just pause here and ask, like, up to this point, we haven't actually procured anything. We haven't, pulled the trigger on POs. We haven't started shipping stuff in. Is there anything to this point that you or, us working together with the power company have had to like negotiate on, or is there any room for pushback at any point in this process yet? Like, has anything come up with the power company that they're like, yeah, maybe not that, or anything that you can think of?
Yeah, at least initially, I mean, it all centers around how the utility company protects their system from your system. And so most times these discussions at this point are strictly based on either fusing, relaying, circuit breakers, because their engineers need to know that if there's a giant fault on our 5 megawatt system, that you're not taking down the whole city. So that's where that is at. We haven't, at this point in the process, working through it, we have not procured any equipment because that doesn't happen until we've been given the green light with those preliminary sketches sent to the utility.
Okay. Yeah, one thing that I'm learning quickly more about transformers, but one thing I have heard is like CLFs on a transformer. Is that like fusing and protection? Is that something that we would take guidance from the power company? Maybe they need CLFs on transformers, or maybe they don't see that as necessary. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
When you say CLFs, do you mean the bayonet fusing?
Yes.
On there?
Yep.
Yeah. That's, again, to them, all you are which is terrible, but all we are to them is relay settings and protection. So they don't care what you're doing. We're a black box. They just need to know how they're going to protect themselves. They're in the business of CYA. So the fusing is extremely important. That's one of the first things, if not the first thing that's asked.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it's maybe a good note for everybody because I heard that and it was like, what the hell are you talking about? And yeah. So, okay, cool. So I think, up to this point, it's been relatively smooth, smooth sailing. We've been able to work with the power company. You rolled up your sleeves and did the permitting for us. Now, we've gotten thumbs up and green lights kind of across the board. That's when we start to procure our infrastructure, right?
Yeah, so that's a little thing that's different with us, Great Oaks, is that I think the material gets procured during engineering. So because we have all that experience with the utility and with the manufacturing pipeline, there's a level of comfortability with ordering material at that time, because a lot of, and it's not all the material, it's only going to be the stuff that is the long lead items. So breakers, transformers, GOABs, all the big pieces of either a substation or big pieces of our 5 megawatt, which might not be much. It might just be the transformers. So, in a traditional model, just for your listeners, the engineering would be totally complete, and that takes time. And then it goes out to the contractor to get bid, and that takes time. And then you take time to review it and approve it. And then once they're approved, then your equipment gets ordered. Well, by doing it this way, you've just shaved off 6 weeks of that process. And with the ultimate goal being, engineered drawings are complete, it gets bid out, and you award the job to the contractor while the material is arriving to site. And then it's just rock and roll. And everybody loves that model. I mean, it's great.
Wow. Yeah. See, I mean, that's all really, 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 really important stuff to keep in mind. I just actually recently calculated like the cost of delays on your project. And like a 1 month delay on a 1 megawatt project is like 5 Bitcoin. So, I mean, it's a material impact to have delays. I think you said 6 weeks, like that could even be up to a 6-week delay. So, you're at almost 2 months there. That's a big hit.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about on the last one, it comes down to opportunity costs. Will you pay? It's not a lot more, but will you pay a little bit more to get the equipment faster, to start mining quicker? I mean, the answer is typically yes. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So now things are starting to show up, and I think you said this is when we would have, awarded the bid to a contractor. They're going to be the ones that start pouring cement pads, and they're going to be the ones that are helping get all of the electrical wired in. Because I think on a 5 megawatt, it's like you said, we're not really going to need a ton of stuff, right? I mean, we're going to need, well, maybe have you touch on this. What would you think? It's probably going to be just transformers, containers, or what else might somebody expect to have to be buying?
Yeah, on a 5 megawatt site, in an ideal world, all that you should have, everything should stay overhead on the poles and then just drop right into the pad mounts. So that's really, and then from there, it's just conductors, wires, and cable tray. So all that stuff is, all those commodities are pretty readily available. You brought up a great point. I wanted to back up a little bit.
Sure.
The utility is going to want to, they're incentivized to sell you voltages at a secondary level, which is like the 480 or the lower levels, and then transform it there. It's important that we have those discussions when we're early on this hypothetical 5 megawatt, site that, look, we want, and the key term is primary metered service. I want to make sure everybody knows that. That's a term you want to use to tell the utility early on. We want a primary metered service that gets you the best rate, and that's overhead. That'll stop on your site overhead so that we can just put the equipment that we need to on and continue that overhead, which is your cost-effective way as possible.
Okay, got it. And I mean, sometimes they'll have to put in new poles, right? Like they may have to run all of that to your site, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Site dependent. It could be readily available, or if you find the right circuit that has 5 megawatts, maybe they'll just say, look, come off of this pole. Again, the whole thinking when we approach utility is, how can we make their life as easy as possible and the least amount of work? Because we can move fast, their rules and regulations require them to move a little bit slower. So reducing the amount of work that they have.
Okay. So then, maybe let's kind of chat through, stuff starting to hit the site, the contractors, I'm guessing, kind of first and foremost, they're going to dig trenches for all the cabling that's necessary to make connections to the transformers and then into the containers. From there, they're probably going to pour pads, and maybe just jump in if I'm out of order or anything like that.
Yeah. So the main parts of this 5 megawatt system, you have your wood poles, which are essentially off the shelf. You have your cross arms up there, or you have your insulators, and you have your fuse cutouts. All of those things I just mentioned are very readily available. They're a commodity. And then the overhead wire, all of that stuff. So you would stay overhead, and then at each pole right in front of your transformer, you'd have a set of fuses, and then from there you'd turn into wire, insulated wire, like you would see in most places, and you dip down and up into your transformer. So if I'm the contractor, like you said, the very first thing we do is underground work. So just that little section from the pole to the pad mount would be our only section of underground. We'll be trying to stay overhead as much as possible. And then once we have those conduits in, we would frame out and pour the pad mount transformer, because everything on our 416 240 side is going to stay overhead. So we're not dipping underground on that. We're going to come out the side of that transformer. So once the conduit's in, or the PVC, once the pad's poured, they can place the pad, and then the rest is just there's really no sequence after that, because the rest is above ground, and it's just as they get to it. Should I go into more detail about that?
Yeah. I mean, you might as well keep going. What goes on next?
Yeah. So once those three pieces, the PVC, the pad, and the transformer, are set in place, then you can really have two teams going on at once. You can have a team doing the high voltage side, which is all the pole work. A lot of times you see electrical contractors have that group of guys or the teams that only specialize in that. So they would be drilling the holes, placing the poles, stringing up the wire, and doing all of that. And then also pushing in or pulling in all the high voltage wire up into that PVC we just talked about, and making those terminations. So that's usually one team. And we've got a low voltage team on the other side working, and they're coming off the transformer, coming out the side. We're putting conduit chases out the side, up immediately onto tray, and then feeding into the two containers. And that's a very, very efficient design, because with the wires being in tray, we have better ampacity ratings of those wires. So we can get away with higher amps through the same amount of wire underground. Just because air is passing around and over the conductors, the wires, to cool them. So the code allows us more leeway there.
Wow. Okay. And then from there, your container's energized. I would imagine it's going to be a little bit of coordination to get the power company to flip the switch. I'm doing air quotes, like flip the switch to divert electrons to your site, but not a crazy process, right? For them to get the juice flowing.
No, most of their pushback is early on. That's why those discussions early on. A lot of times you kind of hinted at it. If you don't have those in early discussions, it makes the later part really hard. And that's what I see a lot. Not having, spending an hour up front to save 10 hours later. There's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. Well, and so I really appreciate that, Tony. I think, for the audience, that helps paint like a really, really good picture as far as like what goes into all this. And 5 megawatts, especially for you, that project is small. But I mean, it's an immense amount of work. And then to have somebody like yourself and your team to be able to come in and really white glove handle that project, it's almost invaluable. So, I mean, it's really, you guys come in such a big way. So I appreciate that walkthrough. I'm sure, maybe we glossed over a small detail here and there, but again, that's where you guys come in. You have this process, you have your checklists of what you guys are doing. Yeah.
Yeah. And for those listeners still listening, you made it through the technical jargon. So good. Pat yourself on the back. I know, as an engineer, sometimes we can be dry, but this is our life, and there's a lot of fun ways to do this. So, appreciate that.
Yeah, I think maybe I needed to go to school for engineering, or maybe I need to go back to school for engineering. I'm finding as I get older here that like how it all comes together is way more interesting to me, and like this kind of a puzzle of like how does it all fit together and learning all the pieces. And yeah, I'm sure, you do 700 megawatts, and for you, it's kind of like, yep, all right, we need another of those. And yep, it's this process again. But yeah, for me, it's super exciting to hear all that. I want to just kind of end this all with like, well, no, that's just a bad question. I was going to ask you, how different is it to go in and retrofit an existing building? But the answer is infinitely, different. So
very different.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe just, we don't have a ton of time. Again, we ran out of time, Tony. Maybe we just need longer than an hour episode. But, like if I stumbled my way across like a warehouse that has 480, 277 power, which that's not super ideal for Bitcoin mining, because you either got to swap out your PSUs on the miners, or I think you mentioned it offline last time. So go into like, there is some magic we can do with the transformers, right?
Yeah, I'm working on a job right now. It is a warehouse, and they have no special transformers there. And we were able to. There's an intermediate voltage, so it comes in at 69, it distributes at 4160, and then it goes to 480. We were able to play with the taps on each of those levels of the transformer and actually get, I think, 417, 242 on the secondary side. Obviously, if there's any voltage fluctuation from the utility, you're out of luck, because there's nowhere for you to go, because you've just tapped all the transformers out. But it is possible. And, if you find the right warehouse that has good distribution in it, we're talking, you don't need a lot of space, but you need a building that used to be manufacturing. It's possible. And if you can find the right building, your build out costs can be lower than the costs we discussed last time. I mean, but it has to be the right building.
Yeah. And then also, like, it's pretty common to have fluctuations in voltage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing to keep in mind is you are going to flux, and that can get pretty hard on your equipment.
Yeah, it's not something I recommend. I just was kind of pushed into this, but
Yeah.
the voltage, the utility has parameters from their RTO, their regional transmission, that they have to stay within. And that is plus or minus, it could be 5%. So you don't want, and that will damage, plus 5% will damage the PSUs.
Yeah. I stumbled. The reason I ask about retrofitting a building is I recently stumbled into, somebody looking to get rid of a warehouse with that type of power on it. Well, I guess rather that type of transformer, already at the building. So anyways, it's, yeah, I mean, is that something that you would come in on like due diligence? Would you, like, if I called you up and say, "Hey, Tony, want to cruise out and take a look at this building and let me know if this is viable"?
Yes, that's,
Okay.
I mean, again, spending a little bit of time up front will save a ton, understanding on the back end. Just even a phone call, pictures, a narrative that you want to send me. It doesn't have to be a site visit, or just understand it. I mean, I'm a resource for your listeners.
Oh, that's great. So Tony, we ended up tapping out like the whole time that we slotted out for this round 2. I think we probably touched on all the things that we initially wanted to. Man, thank you again for round 1. Now round 2. I think what you just shared with the audience not only helps people conceptualize a project. We got into what some of the jargon is there that they can expect to hear in some of these projects. And then, you put the whole package together and it's like, okay, Great Oaks can step in and actually do this for you. And we touched on it in round 1, which is you'll come in and provide the best like cost for a client of yours that makes sense for the project that you guys are working on. So I thank you. This has been phenomenal.
Oh, thank you for having me. Happy to just educate the industry and share some knowledge. I mean, we're all in this together. So if any of your listeners need assistance, happy to help. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Maybe we gave a handoff in the first one, but just one more time, how can people get in touch with you, Great Oaks? Where can they find you?
Yeah, website is great. It's greatoaksco.com or LinkedIn. My contacts on both of those. Phone numbers on there. Again, if you even just, I can answer questions over the phone, a quick question for free. Like, I'm not a lawyer. So happy to help.
Awesome. We'll link, again, we'll link to it all in the show notes. Tony, this was fantastic. I'm excited to keep the conversation going. I'm sure we'll find all sorts of things that we can get you back on the show for in the future as well. Thank you, and you take care.
All right, Ben. Thanks a lot.